On this week's episode of Lincoln to Local, we'll talk about progress made in the Oklahoma state budget, along with some changes to some bills that Oklahoma Farm Bureau has been watching as they work their way through the Oklahoma legislature. Well, Gage, it's that time of year in the legislative session where we're talking state budget, which is always a really big deal to get through and kind of signals not the end of session, but definitely a big turning point as we work toward the end of session. What's the latest on the state budget for 2026?
Yeah. So as you know, we get towards the end of the session. They're always working on that budget. And by Constitution requirements in the state of Oklahoma, they have to have a balanced budget before they can sine die. And usually those discussions go well into May, but here we are, what I still consider the 1st of April, and we've got a budget deal already that was announced last week, and that was put into a general appropriations bill for this week, and it passed the Senate earlier this week, and then yesterday the House took it up on the floor, spent quite a bit of time deliberating that, and got it passed. So with the passage across both floors, it's now headed to the governor. So if the governor's good with it, which he said last week that he was, we expect him to sign that, and they have a budget deal pretty soon. So there were some things in that budget that increased funding for education, but when it comes to all other state agencies, it was just flat funding compared to what they got last year. One of the things that we were working on, working in that budget and asking for some funding, was for a new OSU Agronomy Research Center at OSU. They did not include that in the general appropriations bill, but it's still on the table, and we're told there's still a good possibility that that could get funded, but it's going to be in a standalone bill by itself that we're expecting a bill number to get assigned next week. And as the session draws to the end, it's going to be a quick process to get that through the channels, but we expect to support OSU in that effort to get that funding for the new Agronomy Research Center.
Now, jumping into some bills, there's one bill that we haven't mentioned on Lincoln to Local yet, but I know it's one that the Public Policy Department here at Farm Bureau has been tracking quite a bit, and that has to do with county assessors being able to use satellite imagery to aid them in their jobs, and we've had some different discussions internally about what that would entail, but I know some new details came out this week about what the bill's authors' intentions were.
Right. We've had a couple members have been keeping me informed of that bill, and they've been watching it closely. And it's Senate Bill 2143 by Alvord of the Senate and LePack in the House. And LePack carried that through a House committee this week. And what it would do is it would allow county assessors to use satellite imagery and also drones, which was discussed some last year. But kind of the new discussion is that satellite imagery to identify new structures on a person's property, so they wouldn't have to come out and count those new buildings or whatever that might be. And the concern is we're just not certain that you can assess a proper value from an image of what that new building is worth. So we feel like it was a good bill. If they use it to determine there's no new structures, there's no need to go out and assess that. But if they do think there are new structures, we would like them to physically come out and assess a value to that new structure. We actually asked a couple of the representatives to ask those questions in committee because we were getting different answers on whether they were allowed to do that or whether they weren't. And the question was asked if they could assess a value from that satellite image, and the author said yes, that they could. So that draws some concern for us, and we've already discussed with the author about putting some language in there that would require them to do a physical inspection before adding any new values to any new property. So that's a bill that'll move on in the process, but we'll keep working on it.
Kind of as we've already talked about with this bill, things are changing quickly. We're in rapid fire mode at session, and there's a trio of bills that you guys have been seeing some really quick action on. Can you kind of share what those bills are and just the speed that you guys are having to work at the Capitol?
Well, as we've discussed before, the House has two committees that every bill has to go through. So Senate bills that have come over to the House have been assigned to those House committees. And we saw some of those bills, these three in particular. Senate Bill 2134, that has to do with the humane treatment of animals that are or livestock that are involved in vehicle accidents. So we know that not everyone is well-versed in handling livestock, and we just want to make sure there's some provisions put in place to help emergency response personnel as well as tow truck drivers, give them some training and some guidelines of how they treat those animals and that livestock when it's involved in that vehicle accident. Then also we had a couple water bills that we've been watching. One went through House Agriculture, Senate Bill 1928. Representative Moore carried that bill there in the House, and that's one that would have talks about groundwater usage and offers a 5-year allocation to irrigators and those that are reporting the use of the water they're using from groundwater. And then Senate Bill 259 went through House Energy, and it's another groundwater usage bill that offers some of those same things with a 5-year allocation, but also puts some teeth in the reporting, and there's some penalties if things aren't reported properly or on time. But these were 3 bills that went through House committees just this last week, and then have already been assigned to a House Oversight Committee for next week. So you can tell the House is trying to get these bills through and get them ready to go to the floor before we adjourn if that comes early.
Now, in the second half of session is when I know it seems like we've got some bills that we know exactly what they're about, and then things change pretty quickly as they come across the aisle to their opposite chamber to be discussed a second time. And I know there's one bill that has to do with Biosolids application, which our members have had an interest in for a long time, but I know that's kind of changed quickly, evolving fast. If you can share what that bill is and what we're watching on it.
Yeah, that's House Bill 3403 by Representative Pitskowski of the House, and Senator Stewart is the one who carried it through Senate Energy just yesterday. And like you said, it's a topic we've discussed in Farm Bureau for many years, talking about those biosolids or that human waste that's applied to agriculture land. And it's a big issue for big municipalities, especially Oklahoma City and Tulsa, because they have to go somewhere with that waste. And this has been an option for them. There's been some concerns out in the country of where it's being applied and how it's being applied and if it's safe or not. So Representative Pitskowski put together a bill that would require a 5-year study, so maybe we could finally get some of these answers that we've been looking for. When it got to Senate Energy yesterday, the Senate committee chairman, Senator Green, added a amendment to it that reduced the research from 5 years down to 3 years. And then it also put a moratorium on the end if the research determines that there is harmful substances or there's questionable questions that can't be answered. If anything comes up like that in the research, then a moratorium would be put on applying that for any future applications without the legislature taking that up again. So as you can imagine, there was a lot of discussion. Some of the Tulsa and Oklahoma City legislators were really trying to protect that practice, trying to help out their municipalities and in that task that they have to spread that waste. And then we had legislators that have constituents that live in those areas where it's being applied that have some great concerns. So it was hour-long discussion on that bill. And like I said, the amendment was put in there. It did pass, so it would be eligible to go across the Senate floor now. But since it had that amendment, it will have to go back to the House and get approval there before it can go to the governor.
Now, anytime that we get a budget done fairly early on or have this much progress early on in session, there's always talk about an early adjournment. What are you guys in public policy seeing? What's kind of your feeling of where we're at and the implications of any schedule changes if we don't go all the way to the regularly scheduled end of May timeframe?
Yeah, well, it pretty well could take a whole month out of the process, which, like I said earlier, they're pushing bills through committee, but then the floor work just turns into how much time we have left to hear those bills on the floor. We've heard as early as May 1st, and we've most recently heard they're going to try to adjourn by May 8th, and we think that May 13th might be a little more realistic, but as we do believe they're going to adjourn early with it being an election year and so many incumbents wanting to get out and get their campaigns going and continue with those. But we do have some events coming up here in April, like 4-H Day at the Capitol, and then also Ag Day at the Capitol isn't until April 29th. So we're definitely hoping they stay till that May 1st timeline so we can get those events in. But I do know there's been some sine die parties that were scheduled for the middle of May that have already been canceled because they don't want to put the resources and time into it and then nobody be here to attend. So we'll see how that goes, but we are expecting an early adjournment this year from legislative session.
Well, and as we finish out session, I know we'll be keeping our members informed, and thank you for your time, Gage, and we'll be sure to talk again on the next Lincoln Local.